making sure that things ran smoothly. So that's one of them. Another one that we actually toured around the country. We've probably done 10 or 15 of them at this point. Was called the Festival Fashion Show. And that was a full scale fashion show on really large stages, typically like main stages, or sometimes we would produce a whole stage for it. And it would be like an hour-long fashion show where designers and sponsors would come in and they would pay to be a part of the fashion show itself and have models walk the runway. So yeah, and of course it goes on and on. We were doing something called the Quantum Lounge, which is one of my favorite activations. And all these they started touring because I really fell in love with the companies and the mission behind each activation. So with the Quantum Lounge, it was really focused on wellness, health and wellness, and technology, kind of the merging of the two. So I wanted it to feel like you were boarding onto an alien ship and you were walking in and there was like the infirmary or the hospital on the ship, like where the aliens would heal themselves. What would that look like? How would that feel? What kind of technologies would be there? So I actually did that with Insomniac in their VIP lounge, where we brought in a bunch of tech companies that were focused on making you feel better. Either they're biohacking or they're like light and vibration, technologies that de-stress you or drop you into different brainwave states for easy meditation. So we would curate all these companies together in one space, and it was like this very fluid environment. We'd have different like performers involved that acted as, I call them like mood enhancers, that would plug people into the technology and take them out. So creating like this narrative and experience and having all these companies that have very shared values and missions come together, as one big experience.
And you work with mostly larger events, festivals. What advice could you possibly give to an artist that doesn't do those large events yet? Maybe they're still setting up their own smaller concerts and live shows, but you're in the business of creating the experience around it. What advice could you give to them on a smaller scale to enhance the experience that they're giving to their fans?
Yeah. And you mean as far as just like them producing different club shows or doing smaller, like more intimate events?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's one thing to like put on a show, and then there's another thing to bring the audience into the show. And what that could look like is having like this very cohesive story and sticking with that story. So instead of just a party with a theme where everyone like dresses a certain way, or there's performers that are dressed a certain way, or the decor, is aligned with that. It's about having people walk into a room and be on the start of their hero's journey. So, the rise and fall of an actual story arc for each person that walks into an event. So I would start thinking about, like, just a very simple takeaway is start thinking about your event as almost like movie scenes, and you're transitioning people between scenes as opposed to just keeping like one very consistent theme. You're actually like, allowing people to go through a story arc and some sort of cohesive narrative that like really elevates it, and there's not a lot of companies that are doing that. There's not a lot of events that are doing that, but some of them that are doing really, really well. And it's because of that, like, much more immersive layer.
And so, is there like any specifics you give to people on, like, if they have this small room, they're trying to create this experience, they're trying to do the story arc, like, is there any specific things that they can do? Say somebody's they are doing electronic music in some of these smaller clubs. What are some actions they can take?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at people like, Dada Life, the DJ duo. They do like these giant champagne and banana parties, which are just so ridiculous. But they do like giant pillow fights. So they literally they'll have like, backstage start passing out these very, very fluffy pillows that like wouldn't hurt anybody, because I think they like explode after you use it. You hit one person with it and like feathers go flying. But they start passing out pillows to everybody, and then they say on the mic, once the beat drops, like we're gonna have a giant pillow fight. I think stuff like that is very creative and super engaging for the audience as far as like the actual DJ is concerned. I think they've done a few different styles of that. From a DJ perspective, I really like just like really simple stuff. So putting the DJ in the middle of the room, I think, is extremely impactful. So that way, if you have the ability at a venue to move around equipment, or if it's a small enough venue to where you're actually building the stage, I think it's amazing when they're directly in the middle of the room. So it creates a whole new dynamic. Instead of everyone staring up at one person and kind of looking like a bunch of drones, like just staring at the god that is the DJ, which I'm sure if you're an artist you love that. but it's more about like the social connection and creating this more communal type experience. And it's also very natural if you think about just in the natural world how cells and things, it's all very circular. So like creating this like very linear, everyone's get in a rectangle, like a box, and stare up at one person. It doesn't feel nearly as good as when you could put a DJ in the middle of the room, everyone is circled around them, and everyone can look different ways. It makes it much more of a like impactful personal experience. Those are a few. And then of course on like the event production side, there's an amazing DJ who's huge now, Allison Wonderland, and she is a really great inspiration for DJs. She started off in Australia producing her own events, and eventually they became festivals, and that's how she became known in Australia. And actually I think it was her very first festival in the US was Coachella, which is very impressive. But that she was really talented at producing events herself, so that not only was she able to have this big creative impact on the events and really own the event that she was DJing at, but then of course being that it was her own event, she could headline it. So she would be the headliner of her own, her own experience, which I think was a really unique approach and something I don't see very often, that I think could carry a lot of weight and continue to foster that community that is required to grow as an artist.
Yeah. I don't think too many people are doing that. So what about you specifically? So we talked about, what you do and a little bit more of the specifics about that, but what about your story? Like, how did you get into doing the events? How did you start falling in love with music? Like what first got you all started with all this?
Yeah. So definitely could go back a ways, but when I was younger, even in high school, I definitely did not want to take the common road. I started questioning a lot when I was very little. I mean, about religion, about the 9-to-5 workflow, about like marriage and what makes people happy, and like the societal norms that we fall into. So yeah, very young, I wanted to be a part of an industry that was going to make really large impact. And when I say impact, I mean like social impact in a way to make people and the planet a better place to live in. And I saw music festivals as being that type of resource, and that outlet or medium. So initially, I actually, when I was I was going to ASU, I thought it'd be really great to start throwing events for nonprofits and producing very large scale events. I was looking at, and I was an avid festival goer when I was younger, And I was looking at, these big events that, something like EDC brings in, 300,000 people. And I'm like, wow, what if they just, donated $1 from every ticket, or $10? They'd be raising, with $10, they'd be raising $3 million for a nonprofit. And I kind of had this vision of not only raising money for a nonprofit, but also being able to actually show the impact. Because at that time, I was really into potentially working for social impact or being like a social entrepreneur. And I just realized that all the nonprofits just weren't, most of them do not show what they're actually doing. A lot of it is covered up as expenses to pay for their staff and their very expensive CEOs. And you just don't really see the tangible effects. So I wanted to do something where, if it was $3 million that were raised by an event, you actually were, as an attendee, you saw what you actually put your money towards. So whether that be like a clean water machine, a water that like desalinizes the ocean water for a tribe or multiple tribes in Africa. And you actually saw the inventor come on and bring the machine up on stage and say, like, this is what you guys did. Like this is the impact that you just made. So I had that vision for a while, and of course, like, knew that it was going to take a lot to get there. But in the same time, I was actually living my student housing next to ASU. I was living next to some promoters for Relentless Beats, and so they were getting paid to sell tickets to their friends to the events that they were all going to go to anyways. And I thought that was like really cool. And I was like 19 or something. I was like, okay, that's great. So I started doing that, and I was really bad at it. So I started looking at a few different options. I met this group called Riot Hospitality, and they own a bunch of clubs in Phoenix and in Scottsdale. One of their bigger properties is called El Jefe, which is kind of like a staple at the ASU community. And they talked about this new job that they wanted to put together called mood enhancing. And so they imagined some like good looking guys that would be able to keep people at the venue, because there's so much competition for other nightclubs in the area. And they wanted us to be able to enliven the mood, keep it very entertaining. And what that looked like is like creating dance circles, being able to they gave us like almost an unlimited bar tab. So we were able to, say, hey, I'm going to get you your next drink or whatever it is, but literally being just like a bright light in the club that creates happiness and dance parties and, conversations. And I loved it. I applied for it. They accepted me, and all of a sudden I was getting paid to party essentially. And of course, just being in good spirits, and that's always been my MO is always have a smile on my face, and I always blessed to have a very positive attitude. So that transitioned into looking at how to to get more and more involved, and that was when I started writing. So I was. Because honestly, the mood enhancer thing it burned me out really quick. They wanted us to do 2 or 3 nights a week of going out, and after 2 months, I had to hang up my hat from that one. It was exactly what I wanted, but then of course, be careful what you wish for, because it got pretty tiring. So I started writing. I had an internship at College Times, which is our ASU school newspaper. And we were doing almost the same thing as the mood enhancers. We were the promotional team that would go out on campus, and the newspaper had a bunch of sponsors themselves. So we would promote the different brands and pass out free stuff and play big, games and things on campus. And so being that I was working with them, I submitted to be a journalist, and that kind of spiraled into me writing for a bunch of different festival blogs based off of them seeing my work that I was writing for with College Times.